Bismillahi walhamdulillah wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillahi wa ba'd. This is the second part in our series in response to a Hanafi Maturidi Jahmi who has slandered the Salafis as a whole, and in particular one of the great scholars of our time, the Salafi scholars of our time, Shaykh Muhammad bin Salih al-Uthaymeen rahimahullah ta'ala. You can see here the title of his video, Salafi Belief, Allah Wears Clothes. And this is a gross and mighty slander, which we are going to unravel insha'Allah ta'ala in this series. Now, the first part of this series, we did some background, some history. We explained the origin of the type of language which is used by the people of Kalam, starting with the Jahmiyyah, and then the Mu'tazila, the Kullabiyah, the Asha'ira, and the Maturidiyah. This language is taken from the Greek philosophers like Aristotle, Plato, Plotinus, and others. And we also cited some statements from a number of academic papers and publications indicating that this language of the Jahmiyyah and their offshoots, when they speak about Allah or when they negate from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that it traces back directly to the Greek philosophers. They are the ones who basically said that God is without body, without imperfection, without limit, without mutability, without temporality, without parts, and whatever is similar to this. This is called classical theism. It is also called negative theology, and this is what Jahm bin Safwan brought into the Ummah, and this is what the speech of the Asha'ira and the Maturidiyah, what it refers back to, what it returns back to. On the basis of this kalam, these groups were united in accusing the people of the Sunnah, the people of the Athar, accusing them of being mujassima and mushabbiha. And the Salaf themselves, they experienced and they witnessed this, and that's why we have numerous statements from them stating that when so-and-so accuses you of being a mushabbih, then know that he is a Jahmi. And we can give a sample of those statements at this point. Here we have, for example, the statement of Abdullah ibn al-Mubarak rahimahullah ta'ala. He died in the year 181 after Hijrah. Man qala laka ya mushabbih fa'lam annahu Jahmi. Whoever says to you, O mushabbih, O anthropomorphist, know that he is a Jahmi. And Ali bin al-Madini rahimahullah, he died 234 Hijrah, and he said, Man qala fulanun mushabbih alimna annahu Jahmi. Whoever said so-and-so is an anthropomorphist, we come to know that he is a Jahmi. And similarly, Ishaq bin Rahuya, all of these are great imams of the Salaf. He said, علامة جهم وأصحابه دعواهم على أهل السنة والجماعة ما أولعوا به من الكذب أنهم مشبهة بل هم المعطلة. He said, a sign of Jahm and his companions is their claim against Ahlul Sunnati wal Jama'ah, that which they have devoted themselves in terms of lying against Ahlul Sunnah, that they are mushabbiha, that they are anthropomorphists. Bal humul mu'attila. Rather, those people, Jahm and his companions, they are the negators, meaning they are the ones who come to the texts of the Quran and the Sunnah, and they look at these texts which contain mention of the attributes of Allah, and they look at them with an evil look, meaning from the angle and from the poison of that ilmul kalam, that philosophy that they took from Aristotle and Plato, that language, and they look at these texts with an evil perception, and then they deny them in a variety of different ways. And also the statement of Ahmad bin Hanbal rahimahullahu ta'ala, and this is an important statement to keep in mind as we deal with this particular Hanafi Maturidi Jahmi, who is from the descendants of these people that these great scholars are mentioning. He said, أما الجحمية فإنهم يسمون أهل السنة المشبهة وكذب الجحمية أعداء الله بل هم أولى بالتشبيه. So he said, as for the Jahmites, they label Ahl Sunnah al-Mushabbiha, that they are anthropomorphists. And the Jahmiyyah have lied, the enemies of Allah. Rather, they are more worthy of at-tashbih. They are more worthy of resembling Allah to His creation. Now, keep in mind this statement here of Imam Ahmad, because it is very, very important. And it will reveal to us the reality of these people, like this Hanafi, Maturidi, Jahmi. We will learn that they are the ones in whose hearts the tashbih first originated in their hearts, because they are the ones who have an evil understanding of the texts. And then the thing that they imagine and presume in their hearts, they then throw it upon Ahlus Sunnah and accuse them of being al-mushabbiha. And this will become very, very clear, insha'Allah ta'ala, with this particular issue that we are discussing, the issue or the allegation that the Salafis somehow claim that Allah wears clothes on the basis of the hadith Qudsi, which is the central point of discussion in this particular claim or this allegation. So once all of this is clear, we can now proceed to look at the actual shubha, the actual allegation itself. And for that, let's move to a new canvas. So here we have the actual hadith in question. Al-izzu izari wal-kibriya'u ridai faman naza'ani wahidan minhuma azabtuh. This is a hadith Qudsi, it is authentic, and it translates roughly as Al-izz, which is might or honor, is my izar, which means lower garment. Wal-kibriya'u ridai, which is my upper garment or cloak. فَمَنْ نَازَعَنِي وَاحِدًا مِنْهُمَا عَذَّبْتُهُ. So whoever contends with me or competes with me with respect to them, then I will punish him. Now what this Hanafi, Maturidi, Jahmi has done is that he's gone to some of the conversations and discussions of Shaykh ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah, certain questions he was asked, and he's gone to some of those discussions, taken a number of statements out of them and used them to make this allegation, this slander, that Salafis as a whole and Ibn Taymiyyah in particular, that they believe Allah wears clothes. Now the way to deal with this and to unravel this, there's a certain sequence that we are going to follow. We could have played this Jahmi's speech, we could have played this video, and we could have extracted his speech and looked at what he's saying and then respond to it, but that's not the best way to do it. The best way to do it is, first of all, to lay the actual foundations first. We lay all of the foundations, the correct interpretation of this hadith. And once we understand all of that, along with certain important principles that will be mentioned, then we can come back to his speech, and then the futility of his speech will itself become self-evident. It will become self-evident. So this is the format or the sequence that we are going to follow. So let's return to this canvas, and what we are going to do, you can see here Ibn Taymiyyah's refutation of the Jahmiyyah. This is because this doubt is not new. This doubt is not new. This doubt has already been used in the past many centuries ago by the Jahmiyyah, such as Fakhruddin Ar-Razi and his likes. And what we are going to do in this section, in part 2 of the series, is to read from the response of Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah to this particular doubt. And through it, through this speech, many things will become immediately clear. So let's start with the first section, and this is in volume 6 of Bayan Talbis al-Jahmiyyah, and Ibn Taymiyyah is responding in general to the allegation that the texts of the attributes, that if they were to be taken upon the zahir, the apparentness, then it would necessitate tashbih and tajsim. Now this issue of the zahir, what is apparent from the text, we have to make a distinction between when the Jahmi looks at the text, he is looking at it with his evil perception that is based upon that kalam and falsafa, and therefore he will see things that are not actually in the text. Right? So this is from the Jahmi point of view. And when a Sunni, Salafi, Athari, Muwahhid, when a person of the Sunnah who follows the Athar, who is a Muwahhid, who singles out Allah in his Tawheed, following the prophets and messengers, when he looks at the text, then he sees the text in a way different to the Jahmi. And we will see that the entire problem originates because of the poisoned mind and the poisoned heart of the Jahmi. This is where the issue actually arises. And this will become clear when we read through this passage of Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah ta'ala. So Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah, he first of all quotes Ar-Razi, who said, قال صلى الله عليه وسلم. So he quotes that hadith, Al-Kibriya'u ridai wal-'azamatu izari, that Al-Kibriya, which is grandeur and greatness, is my cloak, my upper garment, wal-'azamatu izari. And Al-'azama, similar meaning, greatness, although it's lesser in rank than Al-Kibriya. So he said, wal-'azamatu izari, which is my lower garment. Now what does Ar-Razi say about this hadith? He says, وَالْعَاقِلُ لَا يُثْبِتُ لِلَّهِ تَعَالَى إِزَارًا وَرِدَاءً. If you remember a few moments ago, we spoke about the poisoned Jahmi mind, and how because of the influence of that ilmul kalam, which is really the language of Aristotle, Plato and Plotinus, that poisoned the minds and the speech of the people of Kalam, and it led them to this evil perception of the texts, whereby they saw things in the text that were not really there. It was merely the presumption of their imaginations and their poisoned minds. Now what does Ar-Razi say here? He mentions the hadith, and then he says, the intelligent person does not affirm for Allah the Exalted an izar or a rida, meaning a lower garment nor an upper garment. Which means that when he looked at this hadith, he is the one who misunderstood, or he pretended to misunderstand, the actual apparent, very clear apparent meaning that an Arab would understand, that any person, any intelligent person would understand when he reads this and whatever is similar in the various other wordings of this hadith. So the point being that Ar-Razi is claiming and assuming from his poisoned Jahmi mind, as is this Jahmi right here. He is assuming that the izar and the rida that is mentioned in this hadith, it is an actual, real, physical garment made of, for example, cotton or whatever it might be, and that is what a person would understand when he reads this hadith, and that is the zahir, the apparent meaning of the hadith. And this is from his jahl, which Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah is going to explain in what follows. So first of all, Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah, he mentions the hadith, فَيُقَال هَذَا الْحَدِيث فِي الصَّحِيحِ. It is said that this hadith is in the Sahih of Imam Muslim, Rawahu Muslim. أن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم قال يقول الله عز وجل, that the Prophet صلى الله عليه وسلم said, that Allah, the Mighty and Majestic, He said. So this is a hadith Qudsi. العظمة إزاري والكبرياء ردائي فمن نازعني واحدا منهما عذبته. That al-azama, this greatness, is my lower garment, and al-kibriya, which is also a greatness and grandeur, but it is of a greater level than al-azama. Wal-kibriya ridai, it is my upper garment or my cloak. فَمَنْ نَازَعَنِي وَاحِدًا مِنْهُمَا عَذَّبْتُهُ. So anyone who competes with me regarding them, I will punish him. So Ibn Taymiyyah mentions this hadith first. Then he also mentions another hadith, and this hadith does not really seem to have any basis. There is no takhrij for this particular hadith, so we can ignore that. And he then says, وَلَيْسَ ظَاهِرْ هَذَا الْحَدِيث أَنَّ لِلَّهِ إِزَارًا وَرِدَاءً مِنْ جِنْسِ الْأُزُرِ وَالْأَرْضِيَةِ التي يلبسها الناس مما يصنع من جلود الأنعام والثياب كالقطن والكتان. So Ibn Taymiyyah explains that the zahir of this hadith, it is not that Allah has a lower garment and an upper garment which is similar to what the people wear from that which is made out of the skins of cattle, and garments such as cotton and linen. This is not the zahir of the hadith. And what this means is when an Arab he hears these words and he reads these words, he knows that this is not the actual apparent meaning. The meaning is actually other than this, which is also apparent. It is apparent in the Arabic language that the meaning is other than this. So again, keep in mind that what is zahir to the poisoned Jahmi mind is other than the zahir in the understanding of the Sunni Salafi Muthabbit, who is following the prophets and messengers and the Sahaba and the Salaf and the Imams in this particular issue of the attributes in general, and also this particular hadith. So next Ibn Taymiyyah continues, and he makes this issue even more clear. He says, بل الحديث نص في نفي هذا المعنى الفاسد. So he said, rather this hadith is actually a textual negation of this corrupt meaning. In other words, the actual text of the hadith itself negates this corrupt meaning which the poisoned Jahmi mind is assuming to be the zahir of the hadith, apparent meaning of the hadith. And the actual wording of the hadith itself is a negation of that very meaning which Ar-Razi, who is from the Jahmiyyah, and this Jahmi here are wrongly claiming to be the zahir of this hadith. He then elaborates upon this point and he says, فَإِنَّهُ لو قال عن بعض العباد إن العظمة إزاره والكبرياء رداؤه لكان إخباره بذلك عن العظمة والكبرياء اللذين ليس من جنس ما على ظهور الأنعام ولا من جنس الثياب. He says that if a person was to say about some of the servants, grandeur or might is his lower garment, and kibriya, greatness or pride, is his upper garment, then by informing other people about this azama and kibriya, which are not of the same category as what we find on the backs of cattle, and nor of the same category as the clothes which are worn by the people, this would make it clear that the meaning of al-azama and kibriya is not the izar and the rida, the lower garment and the upper garment, with this particular meaning, that they are actual things that are worn, made out of cloth and what is similar. ما يبين ويظهر أنه ليس المعنى أن العظمة والكبرياء هما إزار ورداء بهذا المعنى. So in other words, he is saying that if you were to use this same speech and these same words and these same words to speak about a person, that greatness is his lower garment and greatness and grandeur is his upper garment, no one would understand this particular corrupt meaning, that somehow this man has taken a garment from his wardrobe made of cotton and put it on, and that somehow is the kibriya or the azama that he is wearing in the same way that he wears his thobe or his... Nobody understands this. And this is not the zahir of the hadith either. Then Ibn Taymiyyah says, فَإِذَا كَانَ الْمَعْنَى الْفَاسِدِ لَا يَظْهُرْ مِنْ وَصْفِ الْمَخْلُوقِ بِذَلِكَ لأن تركيب اللفظ يمنع ذلك ويبين المعنى الحق فكيف يدعي أن هذا المعنى ظاهر اللفظ في حق الله تعالى. Right, so this is a very important point. He says that when this corrupt meaning that the poisoned Jahmi mind is reading into this text, no one would understand this false meaning if we were to use this speech about a created being, because the construction of the wording in the Arabic language actually prevents that corrupt meaning, and it actually explains the correct and true meaning. So meaning that if we can accept this is the case, if we were to use this language about a created being, then how can Ar-Razi, how can this Jahmi and his likes claim that this is the apparent meaning as it relates to Allah the Exalted? And that is because the wording itself in the Arabic language prevents this corrupt meaning, and this will be explained shortly. And if that is the case, then how can Ar-Razi now come along and say that as it relates to Allah, the apparent meaning is an actual garment? Right, this is the point being made by Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah. And he says, فَكَيْفَ يَدَّعِي, how can Ar-Razi claim أَنَّ هَذَا الْمَعْنَى, that this corrupt meaning that he is imagining is the ظاهر of the wording, ظاهر اللفظ في حق الله تعالى, that this is somehow the apparent meaning as it relates to Allah the Exalted. الذي يعلم كل مخاطب أن الرسول صلى الله عليه وسلم لم يخبر عنه بلبس الأكسية وثياب القطن والكتان. So how can he claim that this hadith, the ظاهر of this hadith, it is that the messenger is somehow explaining that Allah is, wearing clothes, so to speak, when everybody knows that in this hadith the Messenger of Allah ﷺ is not informing about Allah, that he is wearing garments and clothes made of cotton and linen and the likes. These garments which people need in order to repel heat and cold and to conceal the aura. Everybody knows that. Everybody knows this is not what the Messenger of Allah ﷺ is informing. Then Ibn Taymiyyah says, to presume this, to claim that this is the ظاهر of the hadith, as is done by Ar-Razi and this Hanafi, Maturidi, Jahmi and their likes. Ibn Taymiyyah says, وَهَذَا أَقْبَهُ مِمَّنْ يَزْعَمْ أَنَّ قَوْلَهُ. So he says that this is more repugnant than the one who claims, for example, that the statement in the hadith, إِنَّ خَالِدًا سَيْفٌ مِنْ سُيُوفِ اللَّهِ صَلَّهُ اللَّهُ عَلَى الْمُشْرِكِينَ. Indeed, Khalid, meaning Khalid bin al-Walid, is a sword from the swords of Allah, which Allah has unleashed against the mushrikeen, the polytheists. So Ibn Taymiyyah is saying that no one understands that Anna Khalidan min hadid, that Khalid is somehow made of hadid, made of iron. Nobody hears this speech and thinks the ظاهر of this hadith is that Khalid is made of iron. Nobody thinks that. But if someone was to think that Khalid is made of hadid, then his affair would be less severe than the one who thinks, like Ar-Razi and the Hanafi Maturidi Jahmi, that the ظاهر of this hadith is that Allah wears clothes. And Ibn Taymiyyah goes further. He says, وَأَقْبَهُ مِمَّنْ يَزْعَمْ أَنَّ قَوْلَهُ عَنِ الْفَرَسِ إِنَّ وَجَدْنَاهُ لَبَحْرًا ظَاهِرُهُ أَنَّ الْفَرَسِ مَاءٌ كَثِيرٌ وَنَذَائِرُ هَذَا كَثِيرًا. So he gives another example that when it is said that indeed we found the horse to be like an ocean, to be an ocean. So if someone was to think that the horse is an actual ocean and made up of water, If someone was to think that, which is not the apparent meaning, this is not the zahir of this text. The zahir of this text is that the horse is swift and speedy like the motion of the water, in the ocean. So if anybody was to incorrectly think that this is the zahir of this text, then he is less repugnant than the one who thinks that this hadith about Allah's azama and his kibriya, the one who thinks this is an actual garment. So this is really the first point. What is the first point? It is that the poisoned Jahmi mind is the one that is operating on the premise that it is the zahir, the apparent meaning of the hadith, that it refers to an actual garment. Then Ibn Taymiyyah says, وَإِذَا كَانَ هَذَا الْمَعْنَى الْفَاسِدْ لَيْسَ ظَاهِرُ الْحَدِيثِ بل نص الحديث الذي هو أبلغ من مجرد الظاهر ينافيه. He says, when it is the case that this corrupt meaning is not the actual zahir of the hadith, rather the actual text, the wording of the hadith, which is more far-reaching than the actual zahir, the actual text of the hadith negates that this is the actual zahir of the hadith. So when that is the case, كَانَ مَا ذَكَرَهُ بَاطِلًا, then what Ar-Razi mentions, then it is batil, it is false. In other words, the very wording of the hadith itself negates that the corrupt meaning assumed and imagined by Ar-Razi, the very wording of the hadith actually negates that. That is not the actual zahir of the hadith. That is the zahir of the hadith to the Jahmi. But as to the people of the Sunnah, the zahir of the hadith is something else, which Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah is going to explain in what follows. Next he says, فَالتَّعْبِيرُ عَنْ هَاتَيْنِ الصِّفَتَيْنِ بِإِضَافَةِ الرِّدَاءِ وَالْإِزَارِ إليه فهذا لا يحتاج إليه في رد ما قال لكن فيه زيادة الفائدة. So basically what Ibn Taymiyyah is explaining here is that the mere fact in the Arabic language that Allah Azza wa Jal has made idafa, He has annexed these two attributes to ar-rida and al-izar. So He said, al-azamatu izari wal-kibriya ridai. This in itself is sufficient to refute the doubt of Ar-Razi. This in itself should make it very clear as to what is the actual apparent and intended meaning. However, Ibn Taymiyyah is going to elaborate upon that because there is going to be some additional benefit in doing so. So now he's going to proceed to explain this and to show what is the actual correct, true, intended meaning, and what is the zahir, what is the actual zahir, the apparent meaning from this hadith. So next Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah, he quotes from Al-Khattabi, who is Abu Sulaiman Al-Khattabi, and others who have said the same thing. So they gave the explanation of this hadith, and they said this hadith means that Allah is saying, إِنَّ الْمَعْنَى أَنِّي مُخْتَصٌ بِهَاتَيْنِ الصِّفَتَيْنِ, that indeed I am unique in possessing these two attributes. كاختصاص المعتزر المرتدي بإزاره وردائه, that I am unique in possessing these attributes, just in the same way that every man who wears an izar and wears an upper garment, he is unique in that garment. Meaning that when you wear your garment, is there another man who is jointly wearing your garment with you? Of course not. We never ever see this. Nobody sees this. Every man is wearing his own garment. So because this is something we all know, we know that we are all unique in our own garments. Only we are wearing them. So in the same way, Allah Azza wa Jal is unique in having these two attributes. So therefore it is not befitting, فَلَا يَصْلُحُ أَنْ أُنَازَعَ فِيهِمَا. It is not befitting that I should be contended with respect to these two attributes, that I should be competed with respect to these two attributes. So this is the explanation of Abu Sulaiman al-Khattabi, and there are other scholars who have given the same explanation as well. And then Ibn Taymiyyah goes on to explain on the basis of this statement of al-Khattabi. He says, وَهَذَا كَلَامٌ مُجْمَلٌ, this is general speech. وَبَسْطُ ذَلِكَ يَحْتَاجُ إِلَىٰ أَنْ يُعْرَفْ أَنَّ جِنْسَ اللِّبَاسِ فِي كُلِّ مَا يُضَافُ إِلَيْهِ بِحَسْبِهِ. So this now is the key to understanding the issue. He says that the elaboration of this requires us to know that when we speak about al-libas, this word al-libas, the category of al-libas, that whenever it is annexed or attached to anything, then it takes a particular meaning. So when we ascribe the word libas to something, then it takes on a particular meaning. When we leave it on its own, libas, what do we understand? We have a general meaning of the word libas, but whenever it is attached or annexed, when idafa is made with respect to it, then it takes on a particular meaning. Now Ibn Taymiyyah goes on to explain, فَبَنُوا آدَمْ يذكر لهم اللباس الذي على أبدانهم الذي يقيهم الحر والبرد والسلاح ويستر عوراتهم وهو المذكور في قوله تعالى قد أنزلنا عليكم لباسا يواري سوآتكم. Ibn Taymiyyah says that the clothing which is on the bodies of men, they have been reminded of this in the Quran, this clothing that protects them from the heat and from the cold and from weapons, and which also conceals their awrah, their private areas. And this is what is mentioned in the statement of Allah. Allah has sent down for you libas, libasan, a clothing, garments, yuwari sawatikum, which covers or conceals your private parts. So here this is libas without any idafa, It is libas mentioned on its own. Then Ibn Taymiyyah explains, ثم الصفات التي تقوم بالإنسان التي هي لباس له بها يكون من المتقين. He then says, then there are certain attributes which are established with a person, with a man, with a woman, and this is clothing for him by which he is among the muttaqeen. So now a person can also be clothed by way of sifat, and so this is a meaning other than the meaning of libas mentioned in this ayah in Surah Al-A'raf. So he mentions the ayah here, وَلِبَاسُ التَّقْوَى ذَلِكَ خَيْرٌ وَلِبَاسُ التَّقْوَى ذَلِكَ خَيْرٌ. This is actually in the same verse. It is in the same verse here. And so because libas has been annexed to at-taqwa, then the zahir, the apparent meaning of this phrase is other than the meaning of libas on its own. And that's why Ibn Taymiyyah says, rahimahullah, وَلَيْسَ قَوْلُهُ وَلِبَاسُ التَّقْوَى مما يقال فيه أنه خلاف الظاهر فيحتاج إلى تأويل. Meaning that you don't say here, as the Jahmi would say with his poisoned mind, that libasu taqwa, this would mean an actual garment that you put on yourself. Therefore we need to make ta'wil of this text. This is how the Jahmi would think. No, because this is not the apparent meaning of this in the first place. For you to now say we need to make ta'wil of this meaning. Ibn Taymiyyah explains, فَإِنَّهُ لَمْ يُجَرِّدْ لَفْظَ اللِّبَاسِ بَلْ أَضَافَهُ إِلَى التَّقْوَى. Which means that here Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did not mention the word libas on its own. Rather, he annexed it, he attached it to at-taqwa. And then he goes on to say, وَهَذَا قَدْ يَعُمُّ اللِّبَاسَ الظَّاهِرَ الَّذِي يُتَّقَى بِهِ والأخلاق والأعمال الصالحة ولهذا تجعل هذه الصفات ظرفا للموصوف كما قد يجعل هو محلا لها فيقال فلان في علمه وحكمه وصدقه وعدله من خيار الناس. So basically what he's explaining here is that the word al-libas is general. It can apply to different things, and included in those things are either clothing, the apparent clothing by which protection is intended, or it can also mean al-akhlaq. It can be your manners. It can be al-a'mal as-salihah, your righteous actions, and it can be sifat. It can be attributes which are like a clothing, conceptually speaking, for you. Then Ibn Taymiyyah continues and he says, وَلِبَاسُ الْإِنسَانِ مِنْهُ مَا لَا يَصْلُهُ مُشَارَكَةُ غَيْرِهِ فِيهِ كَالْإِزَارِ وَالرِّدَاءِ وَالسَّرَاوِيلِ وَنَحْوِ ذَلِكَ. That from the actual clothing of a man, from it is that which is not befitting for it to be shared with other people, such as his lower garment and his upper garment and his trousers. These things you do not share and wear jointly with other people. And if a person was to do this, then this would bring about deficiency and harm, which a person would feel that if someone asked him to share his clothing or his garments, he would actually prevent a person from that. And upon that meaning, these attributes of al-kibriya wal-azama, as Ibn Taymiyyah says, they are not befitting except for Allah, the Lord of the worlds. Al-Rabb, Al-Khaliq, Al-Bari, Al-Ghani, Al-Samad, Al-Qayyum, Dun Al-Abd Al-Makhluq Al-Faqir Al-Muhtaj. So these attributes only befit Allah, who is the creator, the maker, the free of all needs, the Qayyum, who establishes everything, as opposed to the created and needy servant. We can now summarize the speech of Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah with the following points. First of all, the first point that he made is that the grammatical composition of the sentence itself negates the so-called apparent or zahir meaning which is presumed by Ar-Razi, which he then considers to be in need of ta'wil or taken metaphorically. In other words, Ar-Razi, in quoting this hadith, Al-Izzu izari wal-kibriya'u ridai, is arguing that the apparent meaning of this is that Allah has actual clothes, and since no intelligent person believes that, this means therefore that this is metaphor or allegory or ta'wil. It is an instance of ta'wil, and he's using this example alongside many other examples from the ahadith and from the texts to argue for ta'wil of the attributes. And so Ibn Taymiyyah's refutation of him is to say that the very text itself is a negation of that corrupt meaning. And that is because the words izar and rida have been annexed to attributes. So this is a textual negation of the corrupt meaning. So this is the first point. The second point is that even if we were to say what is in this hadith about a person, about a man, then no one would think that actual garments are meant. And this is because this corrupt meaning, which Ar-Razi presumes to be the zahir, which needs to be turned away from its zahir, this corrupt meaning is negated by the composition of the sentence, the tarkeeb. And this is because the meaning, the intended meaning of a word changes based upon the grammatical construction or the composition of the sentence in which it has been placed. The third point Shaykh al-Islam makes is that anyone who thinks that this corrupt meaning is the actual zahir, which is thereafter in need of ta'wil, he is more repugnant in his speech than the one who thinks that the statement Khalid is a sword among the swords of Allah, that this means Khalid is actually made of iron. And what has preceded so far in the first 3 points, all of it is on its own sufficient to refute the claim of Ar-Razi. The fourth point made by Shaykh al-Islam is that in the verse in Surah Al-A'raf in which Allah mentions libas, قَدْ أَنزَلْنَا عَلَيْكُمْ لِبَاسًا, He mentions libas without idafa. And then again in the same verse, Allah then mentions libas with idafa, وَلِبَاسُ التَّقْوَى. And the meaning, which is zahir in each instance, is based upon the grammatical construction. And thus, when the people of the Sunnah say that we take this hadith or this verse upon its apparent, upon its zahir meaning, it is other than the corrupt meaning which the people of Kalam presume in their minds, the meaning that they presume to be tajseem and tashbih, because they have this evil perception towards the texts, as if the texts have come in language of tajseem and tashbih, which the people need to be protected from. And therefore, in conclusion, with everything that has preceded, the shubha of this Hanafi Maturidi Jahmi should become somewhat apparent and clear. He is operating on the assumption that the zahir that occurred in his mind and his heart on account of the poison of philosophy, falsafa and kalam and the way of Jahm bin Safwan, which has an evil opinion and perception of the texts, as if the texts themselves contain tashbih and tajseem. This is from his poison. He has that poison in his mind. He automatically thinks that somehow the people of the Sunnah are thinking the same thing as him. And then when he makes the accusations of corruption and corruption in creed and so on and so forth, he's really only referring to the filth which originated in his own heart first, and Ahlus Sunnah are free of that. So we can bring part 2 to a close at this point, and in this particular installment we looked at a general response from Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah, and the issue of what is the zahir should now become clear to us somewhat. And in the parts to follow, we are also going to address the issue of when we say haqiqah, that an attribute is true and real. What does that really mean? Because this is another point of confusion that this Jahmi and many other Jahmis like him also fall into. Just like they are confused on the issue of zahir, then likewise they are also confused about this word haqiqah. And that will also be addressed insha'Allah ta'ala in one of the parts to follow.